Say hello to the 2024 Nissan Ariya and Power Plus. While it may be no Murano Cross Cabriolet, I still think it's a fantastic car from Nissan. So let's talk about it. The Ariya is actually intended to replace the Leaf in Nissan's lineup, and I think it does a really good job filling that gap as a shockingly luxurious, fully plug-in crossover. One of the most common points of criticism for EVs is that they're incredibly heavy, and the Ariya is no different. In fact, the heaviest Ariyas weigh just over 5,000 pounds. But Nissan has tried to counteract this by making the car incredibly aerodynamic from a design standpoint. It kind of has this more round, egg-like shape that's a lot more organic than a lot of the boxier cars that you see on the road nowadays. And I also think that Nissan has done a really good job of making the car this aerodynamic shape without it just kind of looking like a blob driving down the road. They break up the design really well, in my opinion, with some nice body lines, a two-tone paint job to add a little bit more division, and fun things on the rear like a spoiler, as well as a more aggressive headlight design. However, unlike a lot of EVs, it does not have a frunk. So instead of having storage under the hood, you actually have pretty much what you would expect in a combustion car. You have your radiator for cooling, your accessory battery, your windshield washer fluid. So while you can't utilize it for storage, it is still being well utilized. And trust me, this thing is not lacking on storage otherwise. Around the back, you actually have a fully electric liftgate that opens up to a really shockingly spacious trunk. If you need even more space, you can actually lift up the floor of the trunk to reveal about 6 more inches of height in the rear, just so that way you can fit taller things in there or store your charging cables. My husband and I are actually expecting our first child at the start of 2025, so one more thing that I've started thinking about a lot more whenever I look at trunk spaces in cars is, can I fit my gigantic stroller when folded in the back? So let's put that to the test, this thing. Yeah, I'd say that fits. Another big thing that I'm really focusing on as a new parent is whether or not my car seat can easily fit in the back row of seats with the seat adjusted for the depth for my husband and I. My husband is pretty tall. He's like 6'2", 6'3", so his seat, the passenger seat right now, is very far back. So we'll test it in this one just to kind of stress test it a little bit. I did actually have to move the seat pretty far forward to get it to completely fit like this. So you do still have plenty of space up front, but you do lose the full range of motion of the seat. So that's something to keep in mind. Maybe go for a low profile seat or just get a shorter partner, I don't know. Now, I think the interior on the Ariya is super comfortable. The leather is really nice and supple. I love the color of it. It stays cool whenever it's a little bit warmer outside. And it very carefully treads that balance of feeling spacious but not cavernous. Even just from this viewpoint of the camera, you can kind of tell how much room I have going on back there. I actually really like the steering wheel. I like that it has the dual textured leather with the smooth and the perforated. And I also really like the texture of the hand stitching that goes all the way around the wheel. The shape of it is also pretty nice. It has these little divots right here for your hands to kind of fit nicely into, and the bottom of the wheel is lightly flat with this little kind of like drift marker almost at the bottom. And while most of the controls in the car are kind of touch activated, like the ones right here and the ones on the CarPlay, the ones on the steering wheel are actual buttons. They even have the little tactile markers right here, so you're very sure of whatever you're clicking when you're driving without having to look down on the wheel. Now, you do have this really nifty camera-assisted backup view, but I didn't really like it because the actual texture of the mirror had a lot of reflection, so I just turned it off and utilized this like a normal rear view, which worked just fine. Everything is very clean and sleek and minimal. It's kind of the running trend with EVs lately. They want everything to look as futuristic as possible. It even makes spaceship noises whenever you back up, which I think is kind of fun. However, this car does not suffer from one common ailment that I've seen in other EVs, and that being the giant iPad that exists in the center console. This does have a very large digital dash. It's one kind of continuous piece of glass divided up so you have 2 screens. I vastly prefer this layout because it's basically just a digital dash on the left, and then on the right you just have your CarPlay. I also think the placement of it is pretty ideal. It's probably one of the better placed touchscreen interfaces that I've driven with lately. It's really easy for me to just kind of like reach up without leaning or, bending forward or really having to angle my body in any way. And I don't really have crazy long arms. I'm like 5'6", 5'7", so they're not like excessively long, and at my seating position I can still reach it very easily. Generally speaking, I really like the interior. I think it's comfortable. I think the kind of like off-white color that the leather is really, really beautiful. I would be kind of concerned with how well this specific tone of leather would age. I feel like it would show dirt really, really easily. Overall, I really like the interior of this car, but I definitely feel like there were some components of it that were really heavily focused on, and then others that were just kind of forgotten about. And you can even see that within individual parts of the interior, like the center console right here. The buttons that you have to control, you know, your driving modes, the fun little tray that opens and closes feels very luxe, but then you go a couple of inches over to this cup holder tray and it just feels like cheap, lightweight plastic, which in comparison to the rest of the interior just feels kind of out of place. You know, the rest of the interior is this really, really nice leather or this like high quality faux wood trim. It's really beautiful, and then it's just like this kind of rickety little thing right here just cheapens it to me. But it just feels comfortable. If you're claustrophobic in a lot of modern cars, this definitely would not have that problem for you. I really enjoy the kind of front open footwell. It reminds me a lot of my grandparents' Cadillac, who had a bench seat in the front. I always loved that feature, and this very much so reminds me of that. And I think they incorporate it in a really fun way with being able to kind of move the center console forward and back. So if you do want it to be more closed off, you can move the center console up to kind of create more of a divide, or if you do want that more kind of like bench seat feel, you can just pull it all the way back like I had a second ago. I think the throttle response feels really natural. It doesn't feel like an on-off kind of throttle. You know, it's not just accelerating all out or not moving at all. It's very gradual and very natural feeling. It feels very similar to, like, you know, that of my Mazda 3 that I daily drive, or, you know, other modern cars that I've driven. Obviously it's going to be different than like a drive-by-wire system in a car that's like, you know, 30 plus years old, but it does feel very nice for an electronic throttle. And it makes it really easy to modulate your speed because there's no delay to power like there is with a combustion engine. You put your foot down and you go. One thing that I'm not the biggest fan of, however, are the brakes. Now, they work, they stop the car just fine, and it's more of a matter of personal preference, but they feel very pillowy, if that makes sense. The brakes are also more on-off feeling than the gas. It's very easy to put your foot down a little bit too hard and have the car jerk to a stop than it is to slowly and smoothly come to a stop at a red light. So it just has a lot of mass to bring to a stop, so they have to, you know, think about how much input is needed on that pedal to bring this 2.5-ton behemoth to a stop in a safe amount of time. I do, however, really love how quiet this car is. It's not so quiet you just feel like you're in a sensory deprivation chamber, but, you know, you don't have the sound of an engine. You have really good noise buffering to the road around you, so you're not hearing the tires of every single car that you're driving next to. It's just very comfortable and kind of relaxing. And there is a little bit of noise coming from the motors of the car. I don't know if it's artificial and it's pumped in, or if it's because a lot of the power components are actually under the hood of the car, which is like, you know, a few feet away from where you're sitting as a driver. But I like it. The suspension for this car, I have complex opinions about. Because being an electric, it is going to be heavier than comparable combustion cars. I think this suspension would be a lot better, a lot more well optimized for those lighter weights, but I think it feels very like floaty, not bumpy, but yeah, floaty. It feels very floaty. There's a lot of up and down movement when you're driving around, even on a relatively smooth road. It takes a while to rebound if you turn quickly. It's just kind of slow to react. Despite not being the biggest fan of the suspension, I was very pleasantly surprised by the steering. I expected to kind of feel numb, kind of like I was driving around in an arcade game, like a lot of modern cars do, but I actually quite like it. It's very responsive, very nice and tight. There's not really any play in the wheel that isn't met with a direct movement. I mean, even wiggling like this, I can feel the wheels of the car moving. It gives the sensation of maneuverability, which if you're driving around in a city, driving around in parking lots, you know, alleyways, just tight spaces in general, it makes moving a car that's this size a lot more confidence inspiring. To summarize my thoughts on the Ariya, I think it is an incredibly comfortable, practical, drivable EV crossover for pretty much anybody wanting to enter the space and not spend 70 plus on a car. This specific model, priced out, has an MSRP of about 50. Of course, you could end up with a higher price if you decide to opt for things like a higher trim level or go with all-wheel drive, which is an option for Arias, which I think is awesome. But I think $50,000 for a car like this is totally reasonable. I would pay it if I was in the market for an EV. I'm not, but if I was, you're not going to be taking this thing to a track day. You're not going to be hitting the toge, carving away at mountain roads in this thing. You probably could try, but it probably wouldn't be that great at it. But if you want something for like the other, 350 days of the year that you're not doing something like that, I think it would be a great option. It would be a good daily, which is important too. Not every car on the planet needs to be sporty. Not every car needs to be the fastest. Not every car needs to be the best handling. It doesn't need to be the lightest. It just needs to be good. And the Ariya is quite good. Very good, even. Yeah, we'll go with that. Very good.